Welcome back to the Fide World Blitz, hosted in Qatar. We have a very exciting matchup between two very strong players, world champion Gukesh D and former Rapid World Champion, Blitz Specialist, Rapid Specialist, Daniil Dubov. And so here, Gukesh opts for the move pawn to c4. It looks like both players are trying to keep things flexible, not trying to show their hand too early. But I think it's a good sign because I think it shows that both players are willing to fight in this game. So let's see what they go for. Dubov opting for some sort of King's Indian type setup. And he plays pawn to a5, typical move in these sorts of positions. Now, the only difference here is that white has not committed with the move pawn to e4. So I wonder if Gukesh is going to refrain from playing that at all, or if he's going to be trying to play that with moves like knight to c3, rook to e1, queen to c2. Rook to e1 is played, and he's hinting that he wants to play e4. And so Dubov, because white hasn't played e4 yet, he can put his bishop on f5. Now he's controlling e4 pretty well. And after knight to c3, he jumps his knight into e4, and now white can no longer put a pawn there because black has a piece there. And so it already seems like black is pretty happy with his position. Knight to d5 is played, but the knight can easily be kicked out with moves like pawn to c6. Or black can also opt to just play around the knight, because the knight isn't really hitting anything right now. c6 is played. The move pawn to c6 might also support some sort of queenside expansion later on. And it is also maybe blunting the bishop on g2. The bishop drops back to c8. Queen comes to d3, attacking the knight on e4. And now f5 is played. And out of the opening, it seems like we have some sort of Leningrad Dutch type structure. And here, usually black opts to play the move pawn to e5. And also goes for some sort of kingside attack. The knight first drops back to f6, avoiding a trade on e4. And pretty soon, I think the move pawn to e5 is going to come, gaining space in the middle of the board, and also posturing towards a kingside attack. Let's see how the world champion opts to navigate this structure in the Leningrad. Typical moves, yeah, pawn to b3 is a typical idea, trying to put the bishop on b2 and try to contest things on the dark square diagonal. And I think the move pawn to e5 is going to be coming very soon. While Dubov takes one of his first thinks of the game, I'd like to just say, if you have not subscribed to my channel, if you want to see similar content, please do subscribe to my channel. Yeah, pawn to e5 is now played. Gukesh takes on e5. Pawn takes on e5. And now, here Gukesh has the option to trade off the queens. And it's a question, will he try to trade off the queens? No, he doesn't. He first starts by attacking the pawn on e5 with bishop b2. His rooks are now nice and connected. And soon, a rook will probably come to the d file. But black is always comfortable here. He can move the queen over to e7, supporting e5. e4 at some point is going to be played, which will shut out white's light squared bishop, and also open up black's dark squared bishop on g7. Rook to d1 is played, and here black has a lot of options on how he can play. He starts with knight to a6. That knight is going to c5, where it's going to be really difficult to kick out the knight, because b4 is not really an option. Black already played the move pawn to a5 earlier in the game, securing a nice outpost on c5. Now maybe Gukesh can try to play for a3 and b4, but the queen on e7 is not only supporting the square e5, but it's also discouraging a move like pawn to b4. And here, yeah, it's really difficult for Gukesh. And he's getting lower and lower on time. He's almost down under a minute. I think here maybe Gukesh already has to consider crazy moves like pawn to c5, which would liberate his knights. The knights would then be able to jump into c4 and maybe find an outpost on d6. It would be a pawn sacrifice, but at least he would find some sort of piece activity. Instead, he plays knight to f1, knight e to f1. And I think this is a sign that Gukesh doesn't really have a clear idea of what he's doing in this position. And I don't blame him. It's already difficult, and it's really hard to sacrifice that pawn, because the knight would just be able to take it, hitting the queen. And so Dubov, he starts the move knight to c5. The queen drops back to b1. Nice safe square. And now e4 is going to happen at some point. Yup, and there we go. The a1 h8 diagonal is now open for business. And white's light squared bishop on g2 is just staring into a brick wall. And here Gukesh is well under a minute already. And he slides the queen over to a1, saying that this dark square diagonal is two-way traffic. He's hoping that he can find some sort of play on the dark squares against the enemy king. And Dubov, he has to be careful here, because things could go wrong pretty easily. He plays a cryptic move, bishop to d7. But I think the idea is that he can bring his a8 rook over to e8. And then once the rook has done this little swing over into the middle of the board, he's probably going to put his bishop back on c8, where it's nice and safe and outside of the line of sight of the rook on d1. And the bishop on c8, it's doing an important job where it's supporting the kingside attack from a distance. Once the moves pawn to g5 and pawn to f4 come, then the light squared bishop will come alive. Bishop c3 attacks the a5 pawn, but Dubov does not care, and he starts his kingside attack. Pawn to g5. The idea is to play f4, and so Gukesh, he is scared of this idea, and so he plays f4 himself. But this is opening things up for black against white's king, and now maybe the knight on f6 is going to jump over to h5. And I don't see a clear way that white can defend the pawn. Maybe he can play something like bishop d4, but bishop d4 can be met with bishop takes d4. So, okay, knight h5 is played, knight g3. Now taking on f4 is a free pawn, but maybe white can take the bishop on g7, and he can trade off queens. The bar slides all the way up after knight takes f4, but Gukesh, he's low on time. He plays rook to f1, and now black is still in control of the game. Bishop h6 avoids the trade of the dark squared bishops. And here it's so difficult. What move will Gukesh play? He plays king to h1, sliding the king off the open g file. And here, how will Dubov continue? He's going to find a way in order to move his f and e pawns down the board, further opening up the king. Yep, knight takes g2, knight takes g2, and now f4 surely must be played. There it is. Where will white run his knight to? Knight h5, f3 is played. But now maybe white has the resource, knight to f6, check. And black's king looks incredibly exposed there. Rook to g1, f2 is played, attacking the rook. He opts not to take the knight on g2. Knight to e3, discovered check. But the pawn takes on g1, taking the rook. And now Dubov, he's up a full rook. The king has only one square he can run to. King f7. Bishop f6 attacking the queen. The queen's probably going to slide over. Slides over to d6. Eyeing maybe the h2 pawn near the king. The knight on e3 is hanging. The queen is hit again by the rook on d1. Rook f1. Setting up some sort of discovered check. Bishop g5. King runs over to g6. Queen g7. Dubov takes the knight on h5. The players are scrambling to make their moves in low time. And it looks like black's king is in the middle of the board, about to get checkmated, but after pawn to h4, black's king is still running. He runs over to g4. The king now runs over to h5. And black just has too many defensive pieces. Rook g1, blunders, queen to h3, checkmate. What a game between these two players. They're discussing all the complications. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please leave a like, and also maybe in the comments you can tell me which game from this tournament or other tournaments you'd like to see, or which players you'd like to see more of on my channel. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.